Thank you. Thank you very much. That piece you just heard was an excerpt from In a Landscape, written in 1947 by composer John Cage. The original choreography aimed to capture the conceptual and technical elements associated with early works of choreographer Merce Cunningham's. There's Cage, Cunningham. Our talk will take you through the story of their symbiotic relationship and illustrate how they wandered from more traditional artistic frameworks, like the one that you just saw, upward to the undefined edges of the avant-garde.
Freeze! Let's consider what just happened. You saw the two of us walk onto the stage. You recognized that we were about to perform for you. That made you all anticipate, having to remain silent, stay intent, and appreciate what you were about to experience. This mindset places you within a binary relationship between the audience and the performer.
And John Cage and Merce Cunningham understood that this binary existed. This understanding inspired them to deconstruct the implications of the stark contrast between the role of the audience and that of the performer. In doing so, they unpacked the very nature of performance itself and opened our eyes to new possibilities that would come to redefine music and dance.
Now, previous choreographers had not refined an understanding of time in and of itself as they had, say, codified technique or technical prowess. One major takeaway from Cunningham's and Cage's creative partnership was their use of time as their primary structure. Now, dance stimulates our visual perception, and music stimulates our auditory perception. The common denominator that these two artists shared was temporality. Part of the rub is simply that these two art forms are fleeting forms of expression.
And so some of Cage's earliest pieces resulted from his exploration of non-Western text, whereby he sought out new cultural concepts that he could explore musically. He took a great deal of interest in Zen Buddhism during the 1940s, and in 1951 he was giving a copy of the I Ching, the classic Chinese text, which means the Book of Changes. It was this book that also inspired Cage to implement chants and chance-based operations into his compositions. These operations, also referred to as indeterminate operations, allowed him to systematically obliterate the time-based structures that he had just so heavily favored in earlier works. Using the outcome of tossing coins, coin tosses, and this 64-segment I Ching hexagram, Cage was able to determine randomly which pitches, rhythms, dynamics, durations, so on and so forth he would put into the piece. The result, disjointed, chaotic, and jarring, sounds like this. This is from John Cage's Music of Changes for solo piano.
Now, Cunningham's projects used chance procedure in his choreography so that dance itself could find its own meaning. When limits were imposed, there was room to diverge from a tradition. This sense of wandering drove his choreography to new heights, for they challenged dance to still have structure, but allowed dance to be organic. We understand Cunningham's work as empowered by the concept of wandering because it abandons the habitual. By eliminating certain choreographic shackles like what music would play, how long the dance would last, and how dancers define space, and transitioning towards questions like, how can dancers travel through their own physicality while wandering through space? Cunningham sparks a new conversation. Some of the dances and the dancers didn't know what music was going to be played until they got on stage, and as a dancer, that's kind of scary. Cunningham created a blind faith approach to making dances. He was faithful to the creative process. He empowered dancers to have their own understanding of improvisation to respond to the sense of wandering that he wanted in his choreographic process. Cunningham once said, "Dance is an art in space and time. The object of the dancer is to obliterate that." In his work, the expected narrative structure of dance was abandoned. There was no cause and effect, and sometimes there was no climax. Dance was dance itself. Movement was movement, and in a similar vein, Cage's pieces began to situate music as nothing more than sound.
And we're going to perform for you today a piece entitled 433, which was composed by John Cage in 1952. The piece consists of a performer, or any number of performers, walking on stage and sitting still, not making a sound, not playing a note, not doing anything, for 4 minutes and 33 seconds. Although many people refer to this work as the silent piece, it's really important to stress that the music doesn't come from a total lack of sound, but rather a lack of intentional sound on the performer's behalf. Cage said, after the premiere back in 1952, that they, meaning the audience, missed the point. There's no such thing as silence. What they thought was silence, because they didn't know how to listen, was full of accidental sounds. You could hear the wind stirring outside during the first movement, and during the second, raindrops began patterning on the roof, and during the third, the people themselves made all sorts of interesting sounds as they talked or walked out. He also has been quoted saying that everything we do is music. Everything we do is music. Now, 433 epitomizes this idea to the fullest. The music comes from the environment and happens by chance, with no structure, no order, and no intentionality. For the sake of time, we will just be performing the final movement of 433, which is called 140, and I'll bet you can all guess how long it is. Our performance encourages the audience to interact with the subtle visual and sonic elements that are at play in this hall right now. Let your ears and your eyes wander in the absence of a clear artistic subject. Take stock in the sounds of people shifting in their seats, of the air conditioning system, and of your very own breath and heartbeat.
In the absence of intentional movement, perceive the body as an instrument. Notice how this small dance highlights the natural curves, lines, and angles of the body and of the skeleton. Allow this lightness to have its own rhythm and the shifts of the body to echo a faint pencil drawing.
Well, it's fascinating to see that Cage continues to use time as a primary structural element in this piece. The greater implications are much more significant. 433 and its peers reduced the performing arts to their absolute bare essence. All context, association, and implication cast aside, audiences were in a new state of empowerment that disregarded the trending conservatism that was so quickly turning off people from music and dance, the modern era. By focusing on nothing more than the medium itself, we break free from the cumbersome process that is trying to understand what a piece means or what art is. We break free from this binary relationship between the role of the audience and that of the performer, and we break free from this elegant yet very dry and very stuffy culture that so many people associate with modern music and dance. And we escape to a place where everything is basic and everything elemental.
The sounds are the sounds, the stillness is the stillness. This piece means nothing.
Thank you. By no means the future of art, the most progressive art, the best art, or anything like that. Cage once said that if you listen to the sounds of Mozart and Beethoven, you hear that they are always the same. But if you listen to the sound of urban traffic, that it is always different, and thereby saying that one's better than the other. Towards the end of his life, obviously, he began to construct some of his own excluding binaries, and even for us, undermining those two of his peer musical geniuses is a bit too irreverent and idealistic.
And yet, modern music and dance bow to Cunningham and Cage, for their philosophy overthrows so many aesthetic givens and dismantles so many formalist ideologies.
And while we need not subscribe directly to the principles of Cage and Cunningham, it's essential to understand that the work coming out of their focused, informed experimentation irreversibly changed the narrative of artistic progress.
Their vestiges are stepping stones for future music and dance. By becoming more familiar with their work and their ideas, young artists of succeeding generations are challenged to persevere, to question, to wander. Thank you.